Dead Island 2 is absolutely a great time, and I have to be upfront with you here, I was expecting it to suck, big time. I remember playing the first few hours of Dead Island 1 all those years ago, and it just never clicked with me. First-person melee combat games are, for the most part, games that I don't find myself enjoying, but with recent releases like Warhammer's Darktide, the prospect of playing something a little different has been piquing my interest more and more, which is why I am so pleasantly surprised about how good Dead Island 2 is, because let's be honest, it's hard to nail down good first-person combat, especially when there is a melee component built into it. And between that and all of the shaky behind-the-scenes development, it's crazy that this game even made it out alive. But after a decade of the world pushing against it, Dead Island 2 finally hit storefronts in April of 2023, delivering an experience that was exactly what you'd expect, but exactly what was needed. This is Dead Island 2. Dead Island 2 had been in development hell for a little over 10 years, and after being passed around from studio to studio, the game would finally find its new home in 2018 when THQ Nordic announced that Deep Silver's Dambuster Studios would be taking the lead. And according to these new and now current developers, they were given a project that was taking place in bright and sunny LA as we know it today, but the essence of Dead Island, which is its combat, was just not sitting right with them.
We took on the game in 2018 and we wanted to start with a clean sheet. We wanted to absolutely drill down and focus on zombie combat at the core, get everything up in your face and really personal and visceral and make that sort of street level personal struggle.
Sometimes starting from scratch is exactly what developers need to produce a vision that they desire. And Dambuster Studios, well, they wanted something different, something much more in your face, something with a punch. And I'm glad that this was the direction that they took. Pushing the franchise forward in terms of its combat was definitely a risk, but was it worth taking? Well, I don't exactly have the greatest memory of the original Dead Island, meaning making a comparison for you probably won't mean that much. But what I do know is that in a game like this, combat needs to be locked down tight, as sometimes a game's entire identity can hinge on this one premise, and that's no easy burden for a studio to carry. I mean, this fact alone is single-handedly why Call of Duty has survived as long as it has, and no matter how many Apex Legends or X-Defiance come along, COD will always be king simply because of how amazing that combat loop feels in the player's hands. And I'm pleasantly surprised to say that Dead Island 2's combat, it fucking rules. As I alluded to in the intro segment, I'm just not a melee combat guy. Games like Dying Light 2 always had a slow and floaty feeling that I could just never really shake or get into, and the closest that I've ever felt comfortable playing a game in this genre was probably something like Darktide. And initially, I thought the same thing about Dead Island 2's controls. From the moment that plane crashes up through the first real defense mission in Bel Air, you are slowly being introduced to how your character can fight. And while the drip feeding of combat information was a little slow, once I started getting into the hang of dashing, blocking, and dropkicking, it was clear where this game was headed, and I was totally all in. However, the sensation of things feeling a bit slow-paced wasn't just with the character, as it was baked into some of the low-level weaponry as well, which totally makes sense and isn't a knock or anything. I simply felt like the first few hours of combat were just a bit boring, especially when you compare it to the endgame, when you are a super soldier ready to kill everything inside of the city walls. The early game combat just felt a bit sluggish and heavy, which is generally a big concern for me as I prefer things to be fast-paced and aggressive. The weapon system in this game is based off of the typical tier ranking system that's in many games nowadays. Weapons from uncommon all the way up through epic can be acquired, modded, and repaired in almost any way you see fit. In the early game, lower tier weapons were just not very exciting, and I did not have exactly a ton of upgrades available to choose from, so I tended to gravitate towards weapons that were fast and broke easily, just so I could keep up my dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge playstyle, just as the late great Rip Torn always taught me.
You've got to learn the 5 Ds of dodgeball. Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge.
may he rest in peace. However, something I noticed while I was getting my bearings was that the difficulty was perfectly tuned for nearly every situation I was in. Sure, the occasional boss battle was more tough than a general encounter, as it should be, but the difficulty tuning was just spot on, and while this may seem like a small thing, I actually don't think it is. Finding that sweet spot between being able to balance the player's skill and moveset with weapons as well as level and enemy design, I mean, that's just really impressive in my book. But that's not all. I also realized about halfway through that I never had to use a specific build or play in a certain way. Every option and path that you want to take as the player is completely viable. If you want to only use melee, you can. If you want to use guns only, you can do that too. And if you want to use a mix of both, well, that's also an option. So every playstyle is available, and not only is that difficult to achieve as a game studio, but it's also the right exact fit for something like this, where it's the end of the world and there's really no correct way to kill an enemy. So let's just go wild.
That is part of this focus we've had on the combat and on a responsive tactical combat. It's not just sort of button mashing. You really have to think about what you're seeing, what you're going to choose to respond to it. It's a real toy box of weapons and skills and mods and everything that you can combine, including the environment.
I truly think that is the best analogy here, a toy box. And what do kids do with the toys in their toy box? They stick them together with Elmer's glue and scotch tape from their mom's junk drawer in the kitchen, or at least that's what I used to do. And that's no different here. Dead Island 2 provides a simple yet intuitive way to craft your weapons, making them so much fun to use. The way that this works is you find various blueprint sets through playing and completing missions. These blueprints aren't to create the weapons, but to create the mods that you apply onto them. And the best part is you can make every weapon nearly identical, as these are not one-time use blueprints. So, for example, if I have 5 different melee weapons in my inventory and I want them all to have fire damage baked in, I can do that with the same blueprint set as long as I have enough resources on my character to do so. And if I'm sick and tired of using any one of my weapons with the initial way I crafted it, I can uncraft it and make something brand new. This isn't only for melee weapons either, as you can upgrade and modify every single gun in your arsenal, turning a typical assault rifle into an assault rifle with electricity or fire flowing through it. Another reason that I like this system is that the higher rarity items that you will come across not only have better strength and durability, but will give you access to more perk slots alongside fixed perks that are already baked into the weapon itself. I don't know, I just think that this really elevates the level of variety you can acquire through your weaponry, while also giving each weapon its own unique reason to come back to it if it has a perma perk that you really gravitate towards. I think if I was to hone in on one area of the system that could be improved, it would likely be the in-game economy. For the most part, it's actually pretty well balanced, but as somebody who preferred using bullet weapons, I often found myself running out of ammo a little bit more than I would have liked. It also could have been due to my atrocious controller aim, as I'm mainly a PC player. But between modding and crafting everything in the game, it just takes a lot of your resources, and it can be a little frustrating not being oversaturated with things like gunpowder or adhesive when I needed it in a pinch. Fortunately though, you can buy all your resources from NPCs that sell items, which is very nice. They're found in every home base area around the fast travel map. And since you're consistently getting new weapons, you're able to sell off all of your inventory if you really needed to get a really good amount of cash. I really hesitate calling this a complaint because I think the way that it's set up is probably the best way that it could be, but I always felt that I was just a bit shy of what I needed to take things to the next level. And I would also bet if I continue on with the game, other resources and things will probably be more accessible as I do side missions and just, grind that end game. While there are quite a few things that separate Dead Island 2 from other types of games in this genre, things actually go a little bit deeper mechanically than you might expect. Not too deep as to push away newcomers or anything, but just the right amount to keep people experimenting and to keep people digging. And this is done especially well with the tarot card system. At its core, this card system is an on-the-fly perk system that you can switch on and off at any point in time. But what makes the system special is that each card is pretty powerful. And this means instead of getting 20 skill points and spending them on a bunch of little upgrades for your character, you are getting a fixed amount of slots to unlock and fill up with specific powers to use over time. And what's really interesting about this is that you can alter them at any point in the game, even if you're in the middle of a fight. So as soon as things are feeling stale, or if you need to tailor your deck for a certain enemy encounter, just pull up your skill menu and swap things around. So there are 4 levels of power when it comes to these cards, and as you would expect, the higher the level, the more powerful the cards. And also, all of the cards can be mixed and matched to stack onto one another, which will give you subtle buffs that really make a difference in combat. So for example, I had 2 cards that would allow me to regain health without health packs. All I would have to do is dodge perfectly or maim a zombie, and then in combination I would get double health because I had both of these cards stacked on my person. And all I would have to do is just stay alive and try to get more health during gameplay. These cards also work with your ultimate ability, which is called Fury Mode. And Fury Mode turns you into a zombie for a few seconds and just allows you to destroy everything in your path. It is really fun. And if you see a card with a little skull on it, it means that it has an autophage perk attached to it. When you use 3 of these cards with the skull icon on it, this stacks your autophage meter to full and gives you a 3-tiered buff for your ultimate ability. And when you combine the combat, crafting, and tarot card system together, well, it's a beautiful scene. While the combat certainly does a lot to stand on its own 2 feet, the system itself pairs beautifully with the game's Flesh system. This is a fancy acronym that the devs created in order to give Dead Island 2 that gross, disgusting, gory experience that is the forefront of the artistic design.
We wanted to make the system really responsive and allow you to see exactly what you were doing, and every hit should have some feedback, basically.
You get to see it literally like melt through all those layers of sort of flesh and tissue and almost down to the skeleton.
It was something that we aimed for, but once we got it working, then we were like, oh, this is really cool, and now we can like have barrels of acid you can throw on them and all this stuff to really show it off.
It definitely snowballed into something incredible from that point on.
And you know, I never thought that I would have wanted something like this in a video game, and I never thought that things could get more bloody and gory than they already could. But when you're in a combat scenario just blasting the hell out of one of these zombies, it feels so good to see your impact making a difference. Whether the zombies are burning, melting, or just being maimed to bits, the satisfaction and crunchy feedback you get when fighting them is just so damn good. And that design, it doesn't stop there. The world that Dambuster has curated here is just perfectly fucked up in the best way possible. All of the enemies and bosses are just disgusting. They're not scary or anything, but they're more unnerving with the right amount of cartoonish flair. Whether it's the gearheads on Venice Beach, the service staff at the Bel Air Hotel, or the tourists at the Santa Monica Pier, Dambuster made sure that every zombie was meant to be where they were supposed to be, and that if you wanted to, you could beat the living shit out of it. The enemy variety is really great too, and while there is a general pattern that you will notice throughout your playthrough, there are a lot of subtle nuances and variety within the overall framework. Of course, you have your typical popcorn enemies, your sprinters, brutes, and long-range enemies that will fling damage your way, but there is also the enemy that is fast, can re-heal, and is strong as hell, called the Butcher. And just take a look at what this bastard can do.
Come on! You fucking... Get off me, you filthy freaking dog!
It literally crawls around on its arms and legs, but its forearms are bones that stick out so it can pierce and kill its prey. It's just so nasty. I love it. And while this clown boss is definitely my favorite, there are so many enemy types and styles to battle, it's actually crazy. Unfortunately, the way that this game handles bosses is not exactly my favorite style. Instead of having exclusive bosses that we need to beat in order to make it to the next area, Dambuster does this cheeky little sleight of hand where they will thematically insert a themed boss encounter to match the area that you're in, and you do need to beat it to progress, I suppose, but then that enemy will be added into your roster and then you will fight it more frequently wherever you travel. And listen, there is nothing wrong with this execution, I just prefer the epic set piece moments that are not repeated, as they feel much more special and cinematic. That being said, each of the boss encounters in the campaign were dressed up to feel that way, so I can't really be upset at the devs for going the route that they did. Now, huge spoiler warning here, but we have to talk about the final boss because I think this was probably the highlight of the game, at least for me. And when you compare it to all of the other boss encounters, this one really felt like it was executed a lot better and was a real boss fight. Not to mention, it fit the tone of this game really well. And with the connection and progression of the story leading up to it, it really did feel like that final moment that we had all been waiting for, the ultimate payoff. The boss has a lot of great movesets that needed to be countered at any given moment, from close, mid, and ranged attacks. It was really up to you to merge all of your skills learned from the last 10 hours and dump it into this boss. But besides the main boss himself, what takes this to the next level is that the area adapts as his health depletes. What first begins as a generic lab turns into a chaotic burning mess. Enemies of all types are spawning all around you, and you're micromanaging them while focusing on the main boss and also avoiding the fire damage, and it's quite panic-inducing. But I have to say, the best moment of the fight, and it was such a little detail, was when these tubes lifted up and exposed enemies trapped in large subject holdings. They are made out of glass, and if you hide behind them, the boss will shoot at you, which will break the glass and then release the enemy. And that leaves you with another decision to make. Do you want to find cover or risk putting another enemy out into the tightly packed boss arena? Absolutely fantastic stuff by the devs. I couldn't have been happier with this game's ending. Thematically, Dead Island 2 is something that really surprised me. I mean, I knew that we were going to be killing zombies in LA, but I didn't know just how appropriately designed it would all be. Let's be real here. This game is actually fucking gorgeous, which is not something that can be said about a lot of zombies games other than Black Ops 3 or Black Ops 4 Zombies. The way that the lighting, color palettes, and textures all blend into one another, it's just absolutely stunning to look at. So, full disclosure, I actually lived in Los Angeles for about 10 years of my life, and while it was a bittersweet experience, I definitely miss it, and if it wasn't so damn expensive and the traffic didn't suck, I would probably have stayed a little longer. However, when I did live there, I had lived and I had friends all over the place, from Malibu all the way to downtown LA, and guys, Dambuster Studios nailed the LA atmosphere. I know it's a running joke to mock the city and say, this looks just like LA today, and I get it, I do. It's really funny because some parts of LA are indistinguishable from Dead Island 2, mostly like Skid Row and Venice. But what I admired even more than the accurate depiction of the city was the subtleties of the cultural references that they made. Obviously, it's no secret that LA is obsessed with celebrity and fame, but most people, when they make fun of it, they miss out on the nuance behind it all. So in Hollywood, not only is the obsession with fame a problem, but there is a desperation behind it that is very real and palpable. And Emma Jaunt is a perfect depiction of the Hollywood celebrity. She's pretty, she's rich and famous, seemingly has it all, but she's actually the loneliest person in the room despite her success, and feels more insecure now than she did before she became successful. And Michael Anders, Emma's right hand, is fully drenched in all things Hollywood. I met a million people like this when I was out there. You can feel his obsession to get everything right for the celebrity, because if he doesn't, then it will blow his shot to make it to the big time.
What does he mean being famous doesn't count for shit? How ridiculous!
Even when you enter his apartment, this is where it really got to me. You can see how obsessed Michael is with Hollywood memorabilia. It's all around his apartment. I mean, even the Patton guy that lives in the sewers, he was a movie buff. Everybody is like this out there. This unhealthy obsession with all things that void reality. They just nailed it. And the best part about it is that Dambuster didn't do it in a negative way to like mock this situation, but more to poke fun at it in a genuinely honest and lighthearted way. The intro cutscene has all of the characters exuding such swagger and confidence, like their shit doesn't stink. The choreography of everyone and everything just falling into place like some sort of silly apocalyptic musical. It's just brilliant. And while all of this syncopation is occurring, there is still a crude yet cheesy horror story underneath it all. And I know that a lot of people aren't really into the story, but I actually found it quite charming. And it's a pretty basic hero's journey, nothing spectacular. But after the crash landing with with a few other survivors, you head back to Bel Air to hatch a plan. While things are moving along, you end up finding a doctor on the other end of the radio who wants to salvage your blood because, get this, you're the cure. And after meeting with the doctor, there are a few bumps in the road, but it turns out that he was the one who started the outbreak, and now it's up to us, the good guys, the heroes, to stop him. Is this a total B-plot cheesy horror mess? Yes, of course. And I love it so much for that. The story isn't the best thing I've ever heard, but I have to give it to the writers and the voice acting team because they did a great job bringing this tale to life. Even though I could smell the plot twist from a mile away, they still built things up nice and smooth. Nothing was jarring or done in a distasteful manner. And the more I think about it, I don't even know if cheesy is the right word. It was just predictable and very stereotypical, which isn't a bad thing when it can be done in the right way. Another point of praise for the developers is for the great main mission and side mission design. Most everything we do is either based off of a fetch quest or a challenge of some sort, but the package of these tasks felt very digestible, as I can't recall any mission that felt tedious or annoying to complete. Here's a great example. After you meet Dr. Reed, he needs us to get a sample of our blood to the CDC, but the equipment is not at his current office, so it's up to us to go to Santa Monica to get it. After arriving at the dimly lit CDC beach location, we make our way forward and fight these badass looking hazmat zombies, enter a creepy medical tent, and place our arm in this blood drawing machine. But after we insert our arm, the machine latches tightly so that you can't escape, and you just know at any second that hell is going to break loose, except it doesn't. And after leaving the medical tent, we head to grab a computer and make our way through the crumbling Santa Monica pier. You're all alone in the dark of night with only the sound of the ocean, and then all of a sudden you see your first butcher enemy. This mix of meeting and subverting expectations is very well done. Not to the point of it being like a Oscar nominee performance, but it does the job and then some. This leads to great experiences simply from carefully crafted narrative and quest weaving. The last thing I want to focus on is performance, because lately the industry has been turning out some controversial games simply because they just don't work when they launch and it takes months to patch. You know that song and dance, it is a mess. Well, I am happy to report that on PS5, Dead Island 2 ran very, very well. And I do wish I had the chance to try this out on PC. I did not, unfortunately, but I have heard that it runs great on there as well. There does seem to be one issue with co-op, which if you're not the host, the game chugs along. I hope they patch that before or after this video. I have no idea when they're going to do that. Just be aware of it. But besides that, I personally only had one issue. And I want to be very clear. I think this issue was my fault, but I would be remiss if I didn't share it. Dead Island 2 actually hard crashed my PS5 2 times, but after a quick reinstall, it seemed to have fixed everything. It was a very specific and niche issue. If you are having a similar problem, message me in the comments down below and maybe I can tell you what it was and we can figure it all out. 10 years. Can you believe that it has taken 10 years to finally get our hands on Dead Island 2? Was it worth it for you? I think it was worth it for me. Between the insurmountable odds that Deep Silver had to go through to get this product out the door, the amazing combat and enemy design, the beautiful graphics and environmental storytelling, Dead Island 2 brings a mix of predictable yet unique elements to the table that make this an absolutely great experience to play through. But that is going to do it for this video, guys. If you made it all the way to the end, I really appreciate it. But hey, why not stick around and watch this video right here? Or maybe subscribe so that you know when my other content goes live. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.